On the day my biological brother swapped my marriage, the entire capital was waiting to see me beg for mercy on my knees. No one knew that the person who pushed me down a dry well to drown 3 years ago was the very same Gu Wanyang, who was now hiding behind him, playing innocent with tearful eyes. The candles in the Shen family ancestral hall burned brightly, and the tablets of our ancestors looked down upon me. My brother slipped the white jade betrothal tablet from the Duke of Gu's estate into his sleeve and shoved that worthless, unwanted bamboo tablet harshly in front of me. He said,
"Smash it. Apologize to Wanyang, and I will return the white jade tablet to you."
I didn't smash it. I bent down, picked up the bamboo tablet carved with the name Xie, wiped the dust off it, and said, "I will marry him." No sooner had the words left my mouth than the doors of the ancestral hall were flung open with a crash. The Xie family had arrived. 3 carriages had already blocked the entire alley outside the Shen estate. Inside the ancestral hall, the candles burned brightly. Through the haze of incense, the tablets of the Shen family ancestors silently looked down upon their descendants filling the hall. Shen Zhiyi knelt on a prayer mat. Before her on the table lay 3 betrothal tablets. One was made of white jade carved with cloud patterns, belonging to Gu Yunqi of the Duke of Gu's estate. One was cast in bronze with a beast-shaped knob, belonging to the Zhou family of the Vice Minister of Revenue. And then there was a bamboo tablet, carved with the name Xie in cinnabar, which looked plain and ordinary among the gold and jade. She was supposed to accept the white jade tablet. She had entered the Gu household at the age of 12, and Gu Yunqi had protected her for 6 years. Everyone in the Gu family took it for granted that she would marry into the Duke's estate. But later, the real young lady of the Gu family, Gu Wanyang, returned, and she became the redundant one. Her second brother, Shen Zhaoyuan, walked past the table. With a flick of his sleeve, the white jade tablet disappeared into his cup. The bamboo tablet was pushed in front of Shen Zhiyi. Behind her, the female relatives whispered among themselves.
The young master of the Xie family stopped speaking after suffering a fright in his childhood. He hides whenever he sees anyone. He even needs someone to feed him tea. If the second young lady marries him, how will she survive her days?
Gu Wanyang stood on the left in a pale yellow dress, pressing a handkerchief to the corners of her eyes. Her eyes were slightly red, yet her gaze peeked over the edge of her handkerchief, filled with a smugness she couldn't hide. Unable to hide her smugness, Shen Zhaoyuan bent down, his lips almost touching Shen Zhiyi's ear, his voice as cold as a knife.
"Ever since you returned, Wanyang has been ridiculed everywhere. Today, I'll let you experience some embarrassment too. It is not like we'll actually make you marry him. If you just back down and throw the tile down, this matter will be settled."
Not to actually make her marry him. If she smashed the Xie family's tablet, she would humiliate the Xie family and ruin her own reputation. Once Shen Zhaoyuan produced the white jade tablet again, she would forever owe him a favor, and owe Gu Wanyang an apology. If she didn't smash it, it would be even better. She would marry a disabled husband, and her future would be utterly miserable. Either way, she was trapped. Shen Zhiyi reached out, bent down to pick up the bamboo tablet, brushed off the dust, and clutched it in her palm. "I will marry him." The ancestral hall fell into a sudden silence. Her father, Shen Boyuan, turned pale. Gu Wanyang's sobbing stopped abruptly, and the handkerchief slipped from her fingertips. Shen Zhaoyuan's expression changed drastically, and he blurted out her former name.
"Lin Jiwei. Don't lose your mind."
Shen Zhiyi stood up and looked at him calmly.
"Since second brother dared to swap them, you should have known the consequences. Now that the Xie family's tablet is in my hands, I will marry him."
As for the Gu family's white jade tablet, you can keep it for whoever you want to take it. She was someone who had died once already. 3 years ago, in the backyard of the Jiyu residence, someone had pushed her into a well. The well water rushed into her mouth and nose. She remembered that the hand that pushed her had distinct knuckles and wore a white jade bracelet. Later, she saw the exact same bracelet on Gu Wanyang's wrist. Having survived such a life and death crisis, what did marrying a mute matter? The ancestral hall doors were suddenly pushed open, and a draft swept in, causing the candle flames to flicker in unison. The gatekeeper stumbled inside, his face filled with panic.
"The Xie family is here. 3 carriages have already entered the alley."
The entire hall fell into an uproar. The selection of the tablets had only just ended, yet the Xie family's carriages had already arrived. They were so fast, it was as if they had known all along that someone would accept the bamboo tablet today, just waiting for Shen Zhiyi to say the word marry. Shen Zhiyi lowered her head. The bamboo tablet in her palm seemed to be slightly warm. When Nanny Zhou entered the main hall, she only gave a half salute, not even bending her waist fully. She was an old servant who had served the old Madame of the Xie family for 30 years. Her indigo and purple robes were washed to a faded pale, and her hair was combed without a single strand out of place. While the members of the Shen family sat all across the hall, she stood, yet her imposing manner made it seem as if she were the one conducting an interrogation.
This old servant has been ordered by the old Madame to come and ask one question. The tablet selected in the ancestral hall. Does the Shen family still honor it?
Shen Boyuan's expression shifted slightly as he stood up to smooth things over.
Nanny, you speak too harshly. This matter was merely a prank by my foolish son. The bamboo tablet cannot be taken seriously.
Master Shen.
Nanny Zhou raised her eyelids, her voice neither high nor low.
Choosing the tablet in the ancestral hall, with the ancestors' tablets above, the young lady accepted the tablet with her own hands, and the entire clan witnessed it. If you say this is a misunderstanding, this old servant will return and report it truthfully. Only, from this day forward, the jade tablets of the Shen family's daughters, I fear no one will dare to accept them lightly.
As those words fell, the entire hall fell dead silent. There were still several unmarried daughters in the Shen family. If their reputations were ruined because of today's matter, no one could bear the consequences. Shen Zhiyi stepped out from behind the crowd.
Please report back to the old Madame Nanny. Zhiyi is willing to marry.
Nanny Zhou turned her head, her gaze falling upon her, carrying a hint of scrutiny.
Have you thought this through, young lady? My family's young master is different from ordinary people. He cannot speak, is afraid of strangers, and is afraid of loud noises.
She paused for a moment.
The Xie family will protect him, and we will also protect the young mistress. But if you are only doing this out of spite, and end up harboring mutual resentment after the marriage, no one will have a good time.
Shen Zhiyi did not hesitate.
I have thought it through.
Nanny Zhou looked at her for a long moment. Suddenly, she took an object out of her sleeve and presented it with both hands.
Our young master heard about the betrothal today, and personally prepared a betrothal gift, asking this old servant to bring it to you, my lady.
It was a grasshopper woven from grass stems. It was woven with extreme precision. Its 6 legs were distinct, its antennae slightly curled, and even the veins on its wings were clearly visible, looking as if it might leap out of her palm at any second. Some of the female relatives nearby couldn't help but laugh out loud. Other families give gold and jade for betrothals. The young master of the Xie family sends a grass-woven insect. Shen Zhiyi took it with both hands and carefully cradled it in her palm.
Thank you for your trouble, Nanny. Please convey my gratitude to the young master.
A hint of approval flickered in Nanny Zhou's eyes. She performed a full, formal bow once more, then turned and departed. As soon as Nanny Zhou left, Shen Boyuan harshly reprimanded Shen Zhaoyuan.
You rebellious son, look at what you have done.
Shen Zhaoyuan clutched his face, still defiant.
I was only trying to stand up for Wang Yang. Who knew she would actually dare to?
Second brother.
Shen Zhiyi cut him off, her tone indifferent.
From now on, you need not trouble yourself over what kind of sister I am to you. Once I marry into the Xie family, I will naturally be out of your sight.
She turned and walked out. Gu Wanyang stared blankly at her retreating figure, never picking up the handkerchief after all. Upon returning to her courtyard, Shen Zhiyi closed her chamber door and placed the straw grasshopper in her palm to examine it closely. Under the candlelight, the weaving technique of the grasshopper was astonishingly exquisite. The direction of each blade of straw followed a precise pattern. The joints were secured with straw threads as fine as hair, and beneath the wings, even finer straw fibers were used to form veins. Such craftsmanship could only have been woven by someone of immense ingenuity. On the day the Duke of Gu's estate sent the betrothal dissolution document, the phrasing was exceedingly polite. A harmonious union between two families is not something to be forced, since the second miss of the Shen family has found another suitable match. The Gu family dare not stand in her way. Every word was flawless, and every sentence was dignified. Yet, there was no mention of who had switched the name tablets first. Shen Boyuan locked himself in his study and did not emerge for 2 whole days. Her mother wept bout after bout, her eyes swollen like walnuts. Shen Zhaoyuan slammed doors and threw tantrums, saying,
She chose to marry him herself. Now that things have come to this, who is she to blame?
No one answered him. The wedding gown sent by the Xie family, however, exceeded everyone's expectations. The crimson brocade was thick and crisp, and the twin lotus pattern embroidered with gold thread was elegant and refined. The measurements were also absolutely perfect. Shen Zhiyi stood before the bronze mirror. As her maid tied her sash, she could not help but remark,
Miss, the Xie family truly put their heart into making this wedding gown.
They truly put their heart into it.
Shen Zhiyi did not speak. She reached out and brushed her fingers over the embroidery on the cuffs. The stitching was dense and smooth, without a single loose thread. That night, Shen Zhiyi came to knock on her door. Standing in the corridor, he surprisingly did not glare at her, and his voice was lowered.
I will go to the Xie family to apologize, and then have father go to the Duke of Gu's estate to mediate. This matter can still be salvaged. Why must you truly leap into a fiery pit?
Shen Zhiyi looked at him across the threshold.
Second brother, on the day you switched the tablets, did you ever regard yourself as my brother?
Shen Zhiyi was struck dumb by the question. His lips parted, but in the end, he could not utter a single word. Another day passed, and Gu Wanyang arrived. She held a brocade box, her eyes red as usual. As soon as she entered, she said, "Sister, I have come to bring some bridal gifts." Second brother, I also did not expect him to do such a thing. I merely complained to him a little about my grievances. Who knew he would take it seriously? Shen Zhiyi looked at the ordinary silver bracelets inside the brocade box, making no move to accept them.
You did not expect it?
She let out a soft laugh.
You merely wanted to humiliate me publicly in the ancestral hall. You were certain I would throw down the tablet. You were certain I would weep and beg second brother to return my jade tablet. You simply did not calculate that I would accept it.
Gu Wanyang's face turned pale, inch by inch.
The person being pushed out is not you. After you came back, I gave up the side courtyard. I gave up mother. And I gave up grandmother's bracelets. In the end, even my marriage is being used to vent your anger.
Shen Zhiyi looked at her.
Do you think that is enough?
Gu Wanyang took a step back, her lips trembling, yet she could not utter a single word. On the eve of the wedding, mother came to present her wedding gifts. She had grown much thinner. With trembling hands, she took a pair of jade hairpins from the jewelry box. They were part of her own dowry back then.
Are you still blaming me?
As mother spoke, her tears began to fall again. Shen Zhiyi looked at the pair of jade hairpins, her voice very soft.
I did. But I don't want to blame you anymore. It is too exhausting.
After mother left, Shen Zhiyi put the pair of jade hairpins into the very bottom of the jewelry box. She did not wear them. Outside the window, the moonlight was cold and clear. The wedding dress hung quietly on the rack. On the desk, the straw-woven grasshopper cast a long, thin shadow under the candlelight. The Xie family's bridal procession had no music or drums, nor the grand display of an 8-bearer sedan chair. There were only 2 rows of red lanterns leading the way, so quiet that it hardly felt like a wedding. Nanny Zhou came in person to welcome her. Holding the curtain of the sedan chair, she said in a low voice,
The old madam said, "The road is smooth today, so the young mistress need not fear a bumpy ride."
Shen Zhiyi sat in the sedan chair, clutching the straw-woven grasshopper. Hearing this, she gave a soft reply. In front of the Xie residence, the red silk was neatly hung. There were not many guests, only close relatives. Just as Shen Zhiyi stepped out of the sedan chair, she heard from behind a pillar in the main hall the rustling sound of clothing. She turned her head to look and caught a glimpse of a corner of a bright red wedding robe. The hem of the robe was exposed from behind the pillar, only to be hastily pulled back. Xie Lanci hid behind the pillar, his fingers tightly gripping the column, his knuckles turning white. He was wearing his wedding robe, his features exceptionally handsome, yet his face was so pale, it was almost translucent. He secretly peeked out with half of his face. The moment his gaze met the rows of red candles in the hall, his body suddenly stiffened, and he began to tremble all over. He was afraid of fire. Shen Zhiyi turned to Nanny Zhou and said,
Pardon the trouble, Nanny, but please remove half of the red candles in the hall.
Seated in the hall, Old Madam Xie tapped her walking stick on the ground.
Remove them.
The red candles were taken away one by one, and the light in the hall dimmed. Xie Lanci's figure shrunk behind the pillar, gradually relaxed a little. He peeked his head out from the edge of the pillar, his gaze landing on Shen Zhiyi's sleeve. Her cuff bulged slightly, revealing half of the wing of the straw-woven grasshopper. His eyes lit up. Shen Zhiyi reached her hand out to him.
My name is Shen Zhiyi.
Xie Lanci stared at her hand, his fingertips curling and uncurling, like a cat that wanted to draw close but did not dare to. Someone among the guests nearby snickered. Shen Zhiyi turned her head, her cold gaze sweeping over them.
The young master of the Xie family is taking a wife. Please show some respect, everyone.
The laughter stopped abruptly. During the wedding vows, Xie Lanci's movements were slow, and his direction was also wrong. When it was time to bow to heaven and earth, he stood frozen in place. Shen Zhiyi reached out and gently held his arm, turning him around bit by bit. He did not shrink away. When they bowed to each other, he kept his head lowered, his gaze falling upon the hem of her skirt. His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, no sound came out. From beginning to end, Shen Zhiyi did not rush him, did not frown, and did not even show a hint of impatience. The room was very quiet. Only 2 red candles were left soft lit, placed far away on the corner of the table. Their flames were shielded by the lampshades, casting a dim warm glow across half the room. Shen Zhiyi sat down at the table. From getting her makeup done early in the morning to finishing the ceremony, she had only managed to swallow half a bowl of porridge. By now, she was absolutely starving. Several plates of pastries were set on the table. She picked up a piece of osmanthus cake and ate it unhurriedly. Xie Lanci, curled up in the corner of the bed, clutching an old straw toy in his hand. His fingers rubbed the straw stems back and forth as he stole glances at her. When she took a second piece, he swallowed hard. Shen Zhiyi slid a piece of osmanthus cake to the edge of the table.
Would you like some?
He did not move. She did not look at him, nor did she try to feed him. She simply said,
If you want to eat, come and get it yourself.
After a long while, a rustling sound came from the corner of the bed. Xie Lanci slowly shuffled over, sat down at the table, reached out to take the osmanthus cake, and began to eat it in tiny bites. He kept his head down, his eyelashes drooping, eating very slowly. Suddenly, he looked up, his lips moving slightly. No sound came out, but his lip movements were clear and recognizable.
You aren't laughing at me.
Shen Zhiyi understood. She put down her pastry and asked in return,
Why would I laugh?
In the middle of the night, a thunderstorm broke out. As a low rumble of thunder rolled over the roof, Xie Lanci bolted upright in bed, shrank back into the corner of the wall, and covered his ears tightly with both hands. His body trembled like a leaf in the wind, unable to make a single sound, save for a few broken, breathless gasps squeezed from his throat. Shen Zhiyi rolled over and sat up. She did not light a lamp, nor did she touch him. Instead, she got up and sat on the footstool by the bed and began to recite the Xie family rules.
Xie family rules. Rule 1. Filial piety and fraternal love are the foundation.
Her voice was neither too high nor too low, as steady as a bowl of warm water, falling word by word in the intervals between the claps of thunder. She did not coax him, nor did she comfort him, She just recited them unhurriedly. When she reached the 7th rule, someone gently tugged at her sleeve. Xie Lanci's fingers were still trembling, yet he stubbornly hooked onto her cuff. He raised his other hand and pointed, his lips moving rapidly twice.
Rule 3 comes after Rule 5.
Shen Zhiyi was stunned. He knew the order of the family rules. He could even correct her when she recited them wrong. She had been distracted just now, and had indeed reversed the 3rd and 5th rules. He was not mentally impaired. He was just unable to speak, and extremely terrified.
Very well. I will recite them again,
she said. She started reciting again from the very first rule, reciting until the thunder ceased, reciting until the rain began to subside, reciting until the person behind her finally let go of the hands covering his ears, his breathing gradually growing steady. At dawn, Shen Zhiyi fell asleep sitting on the footstool, her head resting against the edge of the bed. Xie Lanci sat on the bed, looking down at her for a long time. Then, he gently pulled a corner of the quilt and covered her knees with it. The account books of the Xie family were delivered to Shen Zhiyi. On the 3rd day after their wedding, Old Madam Xie said nothing, only having Nanny Zhou carry a pile of ledgers half a person high and stack them in her courtyard. The meaning was clear enough. If she wanted to investigate, she could. The Xie family would not stop her. Opening the first ledger, Shen Zhiyi immediately noticed something wrong. The amount of soothing incense Xie Lanci used each month was astonishingly large. For an ordinary family using soothing incense, 3 liang a month would be the absolute maximum. Yet he actually used up 2 jin. Looking closer at the shops where it was purchased, all the transactions went through businesses under the 2nd branch, with prices 30% higher than the market rate. She closed the ledger and called the steward in for questioning. The steward smiled respectfully, but his words were completely airtight.
Replying to young mistress, this incense recipe has always been prescribed by the physician, invited by the 2nd master. I only run the errands, and really know nothing else.
The 2nd master, Shi Bingyi. Shen Zhiyi recalled the face she had seen on her wedding day. A middle-aged man with a round, smiling face, who nodded to everyone he met, his mouth full of
Thank you for your hard work.
After the old master of the Xie family passed away, the external shops and estates were all managed by him. Old Madam Xie was advanced in years, and Xie Lanci was in such a state, so more than half of the family's internal and external affairs were actually held in his hands. She asked Nanny Zhou to retrieve all of Xie Lanci's medical records over the years, and also secretly invited an outside physician to identify the ingredients of the incense. The physician frowned upon looking at the prescription.
There is storax in this prescription, and the dosage is bizarrely heavy. Storax is originally a good medicine to clear the senses and awaken the mind, but if used in excess, it will instead harm the mind and disturbed the spirit. How could anyone give a patient such a heavy dose?
Shen Zhiyi made no fuss and put the prescription away. When she came out of the study in the evening, she almost tripped. Xie Lanci was squatting outside the study threshold, leaning his back against the doorframe, weaving a new straw toy in his hands. He had already woven half of its body, and its shape looked like a dragonfly. He didn't know how long he had been squatting there. Hearing the door open, he lifted his head and looked at her with clear, bright eyes. Shen Zhiyi asked,
Are you going to sleep?
He shook his head, his lips moving slightly. His mouth shaped the words.
You are not sleeping.
Shen Zhiyi was taken aback for a moment, and then she smiled.
Are you here to urge me to sleep?
He nodded and added another silent phrase.
It is cold at night.
On the way back to the main house, they had to pass through a covered veranda. The night wind blew under the veranda, carrying the lowered voices of two young maidservants.
It is really not easy for the young mistress. If it were anyone else, they probably couldn't even last 3 days. Indeed, he can't even say a word, and even needs someone to watch over him when he eats.
Xie Lanci's footsteps stopped. The lantern under the veranda stretched his shadow thin and long. He stood there with his hands hanging down, not turning around, nor moving, only the corners of his mouth, which had been slightly upturned. When he handed over the straw toy just now, flattened out bit by bit, Shen Zhiyi turned around and walked toward the source of the voices. The two maidservants saw her step out from the shadows. They fell to their knees in terror.
Go to Nanny Zhou tomorrow morning to receive your punishment.
Shen Zhiyi's voice was not loud.
If anyone else in this household speaks such disrespectful words again, pack your things and leave the estate.
Back in the room, Shen Zhiyi sat down and poured a cup of tea. Xie Lanci stood by the door, his fingers unconsciously twisting the hem of his robe. She looked at him and suddenly asked,
Are you afraid I will leave?
Xie Lanci's face turned instantly pale. He shook his head rapidly, then nodded, and shook his head again. His lips trembled, and in the end, he only silently mouthed 2 words.
I'm not.
He held out the freshly woven grass dragonfly toward her, hurriedly and urgently, as if terrified that she wouldn't accept it. Shen Zhiyi took it and placed it next to the grasshopper.
Ask less of that in the future,
she said. He nodded vigorously, so hard that his hair came loose. That night, as Shen Zhiyi lay in bed, the prescription kept turning over in her mind. Styrax. An overdose damages the mind and disturbs the senses. A traumatized mute young master of the Xie family. A second uncle who managed external affairs, but held back at every turn. And a prescription taken for many years. When all these things were strung together, a chill rose from the depths of her heart. Xie Lanci's illness was likely no natural misfortune. On the day the test results for the incense came out, Shen Zhiyi sat in the study for a full hour. The old physician brought in from outside pointed to a dark brown powder in the medicine dregs, his expression grave.
This is daylily, crushed and mixed into the styrax. Its scent is completely masked. In small amounts, this herb calms the nerves, but inhaled over years and months, it makes one's mind dull and groggy, unable to speak, and weak in the limbs. I have practiced medicine for 40 years and have only seen this insidious method in ancient texts.
Shen Zhiyi clutched the prescription, her fingertips turning cold. The calming incense Xie Lanci had inhaled since childhood was not medicine to cure his illness. It was a shackle to lock him away. She brought the prescription and the medicine dregs together before Old Madam Xie. When the Old Madam saw them, her face turned from pale to livid. She struck her cane heavily against the ground, unable to speak for a long moment.
Good, very good. My son died in the fire, and my grandson lives under there. Investigate this to the very end for me.
That night, Xie Lanci ran a low fever. His forehead was burning hot, and he curled up beneath the quilt, trembling incessantly. Shen Zhiyi watched by the bedside, wringing out a cloth to wipe his sweat, delirious with fever, his eyes half open and half closed. His lips suddenly began to move. No sound came out, but he mouthed the words over and over again, with jarring clarity.
Second uncle, fire. The door is closed.
Shen Zhiyi leaned down and held his hand. Standing aside, Nanny Zhou covered her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. Shen Zhiyi turned her head.
We have already come to this point. Speak.
Nanny Zhou fell to her knees by the bed, her voice trembling.
When the young master was 7 years old, the madam's courtyard caught fire in the middle of the night. The second master was the first to arrive, rushing in to carry the young master out. Everyone praised his benevolence, but madam didn't make it out. From then on, the young master stopped speaking. He hid from everyone, feared fire, and feared loud noises. No matter how many doctors the old madam hired for him, the second master was always the first to recommend physicians and medicine. Thinking back now,
what he recommended wasn't medicine, but a means to harm him.
Shen Zhiyi finished her sentence. Nanny Zhou nodded through her tears. When Xie Lanci's fever broke and he woke up, it was the early hours of the morning. He opened his eyes and saw Shen Zhiyi still sitting by the bed. He was slightly startled. Then, he slowly reached out and pulled out a piece of paper from under his pillow. It had been folded and unfolded countless times, and the edges were frayed. He handed the paper to her. The handwriting was elegant, but the strokes were somewhat crooked, some lines trembling beyond recognition, as if written with desperate effort during moments of clarity. A few names were listed on the paper: deceased servants and old stewards who had been sent away. At the very bottom, there were only 2 words: Brazier. Shen Zhiyi looked up at him.
You knew who it was?
He nodded, then shook his head. His lips moved, forming words slowly but clearly.
Sometimes clear. Sometimes like being wrapped in cotton. The incense they made me inhale made me sleepy upon smelling it. Unable to speak. I wanted to speak, but my mouth wouldn't open. I wanted to write, but my fingers wouldn't move.
So, in his brief intervals of clarity, he had pieced this paper together, character by character, folded it, and pressed it under his pillow, waiting for her to come. Shen Zhiyi folded the paper neatly, tucked it into her robe, and then took his hand.
From now on, I will believe you.
Xie Lanci looked at her, dazed for a long time, his eyes slowly turning red. Then, he lowered his head and buried his face in the back of her hand, his shoulders trembling gently. For the first time in all these years, he was caught and held by someone, rather than being bypassed. When Shen Zhiyi placed that frayed folded paper before Old Madam Xie on her desk, the grandmother and granddaughter-in-law exchanged a look. After reading it, Old Madam Xie remained silent for a long time. In the end, she only said one thing:
Do not alert the enemy for now.
I know.
Shen Zhiyi replied straightforwardly. Xie Bingyi controlled half of the Xie family shops and estates externally, and had managed the household for over a decade. The entire manor, from top to bottom, was filled with people he had positioned if they struck a blow but failed to finish him off, and he retaliated. The one in the greatest danger would be Xie Lanci. Xie Lanci began his withdrawal from the incense. The first few days were the hardest to endure. He could not sleep all night. His hands and feet trembled, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead in wave after wave. Shen Zhiyi removed all the incense burners from the room and opened the windows wide. The night wind rushed in, making the bed curtains rustle loudly. While he curled up in the corner of the bed, she sat on the edge of the bed, reciting the family rules. She recited them over and over again, until her throat grew hoarse. By the 7th day of enduring this, the look in his eyes began to change. When he looked at her now, much of that misty, vacant daze had receded. In its place was a clear, with a glimmer of slight bashfulness, he began to write. His hand was still shaking, and his strokes were crooked, but he put immense effort into every single stroke. When Shen Zhiyi took the first sheet of paper he wrote, the ink was barely dry. Zhuwei, thank you. Looking at those 5 characters, Shen Zhiyi suddenly felt her eyes grow hot. He had called her by the name she used back when she was with the Giyu family. He had probably heard it from Shen Zhaoyuan's mouth, and remembered it for who knows how long.
My name is Shen Zhiyi,
she said, her voice a little raspy. He wrote again. I know. Zhiyi sounds better. Xie Bingyi arrived sooner than expected. He was drinking tea in the main hall, his smile as warm and genial as ever. Seeing Shen Zhiyi enter, he rose and cupped his hands in greeting.
You have worked hard, young mistress. Lanci is a difficult child. He must have caused you a lot of trouble.
Shen Zhiyi bowed formally and properly, answering with a smile.
The young master is very good. It is no trouble.
Xie Bingyi's hand holding the teacup paused for a brief moment, and then his smile deepened.
That is good.
The tea lid clinked against the rim of the cup. A soft, crisp snap echoed. He changed the subject, talking about the income of the shops outside and this year's land rents, leaving no loopholes whatsoever. Shen Zhiyi responded half-heartedly, while piecing the puzzle together in her mind. The brazier had been tampered with. The courtyard gate was locked from the outside that night. After Madame Xie died, Xie Bingyi, under the pretext of sharing his nephew's burdens, took over the external affairs. He also enthusiastically consulted doctors and recommended medicine, using bowls of decoctions and burners of incense to lock Xie Lanci in a state of confusion. A young master who could not speak and shrank away from everyone would naturally not get in the way of him running the household. Pieces of evidence were secretly delivered to the local magistrate's office, as it was inconvenient for the Xie family to step forward directly. Nanny Zhou tracked down the old servants who had been dismissed back then to file the petition from the outside. Old Madam Xie suppressed any news within the manor, keeping everything looking normal on the surface. Xie Lanci wrote more and more words. He poured out the things he remembered, bit by bit. Sometimes his brush would stop mid-write, his hand trembling violently, causing ink drops to splatter and smudge on the paper. He would then tear it up and start over. One day, he wrote 2 full sheets of paper. When he wrote about the day the fire broke out in his mother's courtyard, he buried his head in his knees, his shoulders trembling for a long time. He handed a sheet of paper to Shen Zhiyi.
I was afraid that if I spoke, no one would believe me. Grandmother is old, and second uncle is in charge of the household. I am someone who cannot speak. Nothing I say would be taken seriously by anyone.
After Shen Zhiyi finished reading, she took up the brush and wrote underneath,
Now you write it down, and I will speak it for you.
Xie Lanci stared at that line of characters for a very long time. Then, he picked up the brush, and next to her words, he drew a tiny, crooked grasshopper. It looked exactly like the grass-woven grasshopper from back then. On the day of the spring ancestral ritual, the Xie family ancestral hall was brightly lit with candles. The elders and youths of the entire clan filled the hall. Old Madam Xie sat upright in the seat of honor. First, she questioned a few accounts regarding the land properties. The accountant of the second branch brought the ledger to report, reporting every single entry flawlessly. Xie Bingyi sat just below the old madam, holding his tea with a faint smile, looking no different from usual. He probably thought today was just a formality. Shen Zhiyi stood up. She opened by asking only one question.
Why was all the soothing incense Lanci used every month billed to the shops under the second branch's name, at a price 30% higher than the market rate?
Xie Bingyi's hand holding the teacup paused slightly. Then he smiled and said,
The young mistress has just married into the family and does not understand the Xie family's past affairs. Lanci has been mute since childhood. That incense was prescribed by a doctor. Using our own shops was merely for convenience and safety.
Which doctor wrote the prescription?
Shen Zhiyi stared at him. Xie Bingyi gave a name. Shen Zhiyi glanced toward the door. Nanny Zhou led 3 doctors in, one after another. One was a retired imperial physician from the capital. One was an esteemed senior physician from Tongrentang. And the other was the physician who had treated Xie Lanci back then, but had been dismissed by the second branch. The incense and medicine dregs were brought forward, and 3 prescriptions were laid out side by side on the table. The old imperial physician examined the medicine dregs, his voice trembling when he looked up.
How is this soothing incense? It has clearly been laced with forget. Me, not grass. The dosage is enough to make one's mind groggy and render them unable to speak. This is not curing an illness. This is deliberate harm.
The entire hall erupted in an uproar. Xie Bingyi's face darkened.
Lanci was already mute. Using soothing incense was to keep him from being disturbed. For the young mistress to take a bunch of things from who knows where and pin the blame on me is going a bit too far.
Then let us not speak of the incense.
Shen Zhiyi shifted the topic, her voice as calm as ice.
Let us speak of the fire back then. Bring them in.
The side door was pushed open. 2 white-haired elders were helped into the ancestral hall. One was the sweeping maid from Madame Xie's courtyard back then, and the other was an old gatekeeper who had been sent away to the manor for over a decade. The sweeping maid knelt down and cried out her grievance.
The fire that night was tampered with. Kerosene was splashed on the bed curtains, and the courtyard door was locked from the outside. This old servant saw it with her own eyes. But back then, no one dared to ask. Anyone who asked would be sold off.
Xie Bingyi slammed his hand on the table and stood up, the teacup tipping over and rolling twice on the table.
Absurd. Witnesses can be bought with money. Old Madam, are you just going to let a newly wedded daughter-in-law throw the ancestral hall into such chaos?
Midway through his sentence, out of the corner of his eye, he saw someone step out from behind the screen, and his voice stopped abruptly. Xie Lanci walked out from behind the screen. He did not hide, nor did he tremble. Wearing a moon-white robe, he walked step by step to Shen Zhiyi's side and stood still. The entire hall was dead silent. Someone dropped their teacup, shattering it to pieces on the floor. Holding a stack of papers in his hand, he walked up to Old Madam Xie, knelt down, and presented them with both hands. The papers were densely covered with writing. Some strokes were still trembling, but every single word was crystal clear. The position of the brazier, the locked courtyard door, the sound of his mother pounding on the door, the firelight outside the window, and his second uncle's face standing outside the courtyard. Old Madam Xie read through them page by page, her hands shaking so much she could barely hold the paper. He looked up at Xie Bingyi. There were no tears in his eyes, only a coldness as sharp as a blade. Xie Lanci stood up and turned to face Xie Bingyi. His lips moved, but no sound came out, yet everyone in the hall understood the shape of his mouth.
Second uncle.
He held up a sheet of paper with only a single line of writing on it. You harmed my mother, and you harmed me for another 10 years. The hall erupted into chaos. Xie Bingyi took a step back, the smile on his face finally shattering. The doors of the ancestral hall were pushed open, and government officers filed in. The leader cupped his hands in greeting.
Old Madam, The complaint has been received. Both witnesses and physical evidence are present. Please ask the second master to come with us.
As Xie Bingyi was seized, he finally lost his composure. He turned back and shrieked.
Sister-in-law, all these years for the Xie family,
With a sharp thud of her cane,
How dare you call me sister-in-law again? How can you ever repay me for my son's life?
the officers led him away. Xie Lanci stood in the center of the ancestral hall, his shoulders still tense and rigid. Then he turned his head to look at Shen Zhiyi beside him. She still hadn't moved a single step. After Xie Bingyi was punished according to the law, the Xie family was like a stirred-up hornet's nest. The people planted by the second branch were cleared out overnight. There were more vacant managerial positions than there were fields. The grain boats remained docked at the wharf for half a month, with no one to take delivery. The accounts of the pharmacies were a tangled mess, and half of the lease agreements on the estates had been eaten by moths. Old Madam Xie's energy was failing, and Xie Lanci was still recovering. Shen Zhiyi moved all the account books, internal and external, into the study, going through them one by one from the very beginning. Outside, those waiting to see them fail craned their necks to watch. The young master of the Xie family was physically disabled, and the newly wedded young mistress was the daughter the Shen family didn't want. Now that the second branch had fallen, could the Xie family still hold on? 3 months later, the grain boats at the pier departed on schedule. The pharmacy brought in a new resident physician, and its revenue actually increased by 20% compared to last year. Those who had craned their necks to watch silently drew back. Members of the Shen family began to visit one after another. Her father, Shen Boiwan, was the first to arrive. He set down a few boxes of medicinal herbs, stood in the hall rubbing his hands for a long time, and finally managed to squeeze out a sentence.
If you run into any difficulties, send word back home.
Shen Zhiyi gave a soft nod of agreement. Father and daughter stood in silence, with nothing more to say. He rubbed his hands together once more, and then departed. Her mother arrived a bit later, bringing a whole carriage full of goods, from fine silks to nourishing tonics. She had brought everything imaginable. When Xie Lanci came out to pay his respects, her gaze lingered on him for a moment. The smile on her face stiffened for a moment. She was probably still not used to this mute son-in-law. Xie Lanci stepped forward to pour the tea. His movements were much steadier than when they first married. His wrist no longer trembled. The tea poured into the cup in a steady stream, without a single drop spilling. After putting down the teapot, he drew a folded piece of paper from his sleeve, unfolded it, and presented it with both hands. There were only 4 words on the paper. Please enjoy, mother-in-law. The handwriting was neat, and the brushstrokes even, with none of the crooked trembling from 3 months ago. Her mother was stunned. She looked at the paper, then back at Xie Lanci, and her eyes suddenly welled with tears. She took the tea and took a sip, lowered her head, and said,
Good tea.
Though her voice was choked with emotion, Shen Zhaoyuan arrived the latest. He stood outside the door for a good while before coming in. He saw Xie Lanci sitting by the window, holding a brush and writing something. As his brush flowed like dragons and snakes, he would occasionally exchange a few words with Shen Zhiyi. There was no sound. They were using pen and paper, yet the two of them conversed effortlessly. He remained silent for a long time.
That wooden plaque.
Before Shen Zhaoyuan left, he finally spoke.
I am the one who let you down.
Shen Zhiyi looked at him. She didn't say it was all in the past, nor did she say she didn't blame him. She just nodded.
Brother, this apology. I hear you.
Shen Zhaoyuan turned and walked to the door, then turned back and bowed solemnly to Xie Lanci.
Thank you for treating Zhiyi well.
Xie Lanci thought for a moment, then picked up his brush and wrote 5 characters, handing the paper to him. She treated me well first. After Shen Zhaoyuan left, Shen Zhiyi picked up the piece of paper and looked at it, saying nothing. Xie Lanci stole a glance at her from the side, his fingers unconsciously rubbing his sleeve.
What are you nervous about?
Without raising her head, he wrote again. I was afraid you would say I wrote it wrong. Shen Zhiyi couldn't help but smile. She folded the piece of paper and put it in her vanity box, placing it together with the grass-woven grasshopper from before. Outside the window, someone was calling for the young mistress to check the accounts. She answered and walked out, but turned back at the door.
Don't wait up for me tonight. Go to sleep first.
Xie Lanci nodded, but when she finished her work and returned, the lamp under the corridor was still lit. He was squatting by the door, weaving a new grass toy, with 3 or 4 already placed by his side. A grasshopper, a dragonfly, a butterfly, lined up in a row. As if waiting for her inspection, Shen Zhiyi bent down and picked up the butterfly. The patterns on the wings were woven much finer than before. She thought, his hands are getting steadier and steadier. Xie Lanci's recovery was slower than everyone expected. Sometimes he could sit in the study reading account books for half the day, writing detailed annotations in the margins with his brush, his handwriting so neat it looked engraved. Sometimes he would suddenly forget things, standing under the corridor staring blankly at something. Nanny Joe had to call him several times before he would turn his head in a daze. On rainy, thunderous nights, he would still wake up in a fright, shrinking into the corner of the bed and wrapping himself in the quilt. When he saw braziers and rows of candles, he would still freeze, his pupils dilating slightly, taking quite a while before he could look away. But he no longer hid from people. He began trying to use paper and brush to converse with others, starting with Nanny Joe, then with a few trustworthy stewards, and then with the clan elders who occasionally came to the estate to discuss business. He still didn't say much, but every word was written on paper, clear and plain. He was learning to write down the chaos in his heart. One day, the wind was strong, making the old locust tree in the courtyard rustle loudly. He sat by the window and wrote, "Jue, the wind is strong today. I feel a bit unsettled." Another time, someone from the second branch came to collect some old belongings. After they left, he wrote, "People from the second branch came. I don't like them." Shen Zhiyi collected these slips of paper one by one, stacking them in her vanity box. Occasionally, she would pull them out to read, finding them more delightful than any storybook. On the day Old Madam Xie handed the family seal to Xie Lanci, the entire clan was present in the hall. The ebony box was open, and the heavy bronze seal lay quietly on the velvet lining. Xie Lanci stared at it for a long time. He reached out his hand, his fingertips trembling as they touched the bronze seal. The cold metal made his entire body tense up for an instant. Then he turned his head to look at Shen Zhiyi beside him. She stood half a step away on his right, her sleeve gently brushing against the back of his hand. She said nothing, only nodding slightly. He withdrew his gaze, firmly grasped the bronze seal, and raised it high. The hall fell silent for a moment. Then, a chorus of scattered congratulations rang out. That night, he wrote a line of words for her. "In the past, I felt that I was completely useless." After Shen Zhiyi finished reading it, he pressed the paper onto the table, picked up a brush, and wrote next to it, "You are not." He wrote again, "Now I know I am not." In the autumn, the two of them went to stay at a manor outside the city for a few days. The manor was not large. 2 persimmon trees were planted in the courtyard, most of their leaves already fallen, leaving a few ripe, red persimmons hanging on the branches. Xie Lanci sat on the threshold, weaving straw toys. A small bundle of selected straw stems lay beside him. He wove from morning till night, weaving a row of dragonflies and butterflies, all lined up neatly. He picked out the most exquisite butterfly and handed it to Shen Zhiyi. The butterfly's wings were woven from overlapping grass stems of 2 different colors. Its antennae curved just right, resting in his palm. It looked as if it were about to take flight. He wrote, "On our wedding day, I didn't dare give you anything good, fearing you would look down on it." He turned the paper over and wrote again, "I am not afraid now." Shen Zhiyi pinned the butterfly into her hair, turned to look at him, and asked, "Does it look good?" Xie Lanci looked at her, the corners of his mouth curving upward. It was not like the timid, fleeting smile of the past, but a genuine smile that spread from the corners of his mouth to the depths of his eyes. That was the first time Shen Zhiyi had ever seen him smile. She averted her gaze and took a sip of the tea beside her, feeling as though today's tea was somewhat sweeter than usual. The persimmons in the courtyard swayed gently in the wind, and the sunlight filtered down through the branches, falling upon the row of straw toys Xie Lanci had woven, making them look golden and bright. Shen Zhaoyuan married the daughter of a Hanlin Academy compiler, whose surname was Sick, and she had a lively personality. When she laughed, her voice was even louder than the groom's. During the wedding ceremony, Shen Zhaoyuan was so nervous he was completely stiff, and his bride let out a chuckle from beneath her veil, causing all the guests in the hall to laugh along. Shen Zhiyi and Xie Lanci arrived in the capital the day before the wedding, not having been back for 2 years. The locust tree in front of the Shen manor looked just the same, though the gatekeeper had changed. He stared at her in surprise for a moment, before running inside to announce her arrival. Shen Boyuan came out to greet them, taking the medicinal herbs from Xie Lanci's hands, muttering, "It is good to have you back," repeating it several times. When the bride served the tea, Shen Zhiyi sat in the guest of honor seat. Just as she was about to stand up to receive it, the bride, already smiling, held the teacup, holding the teacup with a beaming smile.
"I have long heard my husband mention you, second sister. He said you are highly capable, and that he acted foolishly in the past. He asked me to apologize to you on his behalf when I met you."
Mrs. Su stuffed the teacup into his hands and added in a lowered voice,
He also said, "If he hadn't acted so foolishly, the Xie family wouldn't have gotten such a bargain."
Shen Zhiyi couldn't help but burst out laughing. Xie Lanci sat beside her, hearing those words. His lips also curled into a smile. Now, occasionally, he could let out a very soft laugh, like a soft breath, short and low, as if afraid of startling anyone. After the banquet, Shen Zhaoyuan saw them out. He stood at the door for a moment, pulled a wooden bird from his sleeve, and handed it to Xie Lanci. It was a magpie. The wings were carved with uneven thickness, and its beak slightly crooked. The carving work was terribly clumsy, yet one could see the traces of repeated polishing. Xie Lanci accepted it with both hands, looked at it, and pulled a charcoal pencil and a slip of paper from his sleeve, resting them on his palm. palm. He wrote 3 words. Thank you, second brother. Shen Zhiyi stared at those 3 words, his Adam's apple bobbing. He suddenly turned his head away, and only turned back after a long while, his eyes slightly red. In a gruff voice he said,
Send word earlier the next time you come to the capital, so your sister-in-law can prepare things for you.
The carriage on their return journey rumbled along the streets of the capital. The setting sun filtered through the gaps in the carriage curtains, casting slender streaks of golden light across their laps. Shen Zhiyi leaned against the carriage wall, twirling the wooden bird in her hand, and suddenly asked,
Are you happy today?
Xie Lanci took the paper and pen to write. Happy. You smiled a lot. She turned her head to look at him.
Because you were smiling too.
He did not reply immediately, but lowered his head and wrote for a long time, the tip of his pen pausing and moving on the paper, moving and pausing again. Shen Zhiyi did not rush him. The evening light from outside the curtain shone on his fingers, making those tiny scars accumulated over the years appear a bit fainter. He finally handed the paper over, which was filled to the brim with writing. Juwei, that day when you picked up the bamboo plaque in the ancestral hall, I heard the news at the Xie residence too. Nanny Zhou said, the eldest daughter of the Shen family has accepted your plaque. I asked her, did she cry? Nanny Zhou said, no. She only said, I will marry. At that moment I thought, this person seems different. Shen Zhiyi looked at these lines, her eyes burning. She carefully folded the paper and tucked it into her sleeve. Then she took his hand.
Xie Lanci, thank you for waiting so long.
He shook his head and wrote in her palm, thank you for coming. As the carriage passed through the city gates, the setting sun dyed the entire street in shades of orange, red. Xie Lanci leaned against Shen Zhiyi's shoulder, his fingers moving swiftly. A blade of grass in his fingertips gradually turned into a new grasshopper, plumper than any he had made before, and perfectly shaped. Shen Zhiyi looked out the window, suddenly remembering that afternoon in the ancestral hall. The hall filled with candlelight, the whispering laughter. That bamboo plaque had fallen to the ground so softly it made almost no sound. Those who laughed at him would probably never know that what she picked up was never humiliation, but her path away from the Shen family's partiality and cold shoulders, as well as the path by which Xie Lanci was led out from 10 years of silence and fear. They had both been placed in the wrong positions, but fortunately, in the end, neither of them remained in place.